Hi, my name is Missy. I'm going to explain to you about my backyard. It's big and the soil is very rich. People usually think that in Arizona that it's dry and flat and there's tumbleweeds, but that's really not true. My backyard is beautiful. There's a bunch of different trees. So our trees, we have a fig tree, we have 3 lemon trees, and we have 2 other kinds of trees. The strangest one though is we have a bamboo tree that's 25 feet tall. So my neighborhood has an irrigation system, and every 3 weeks this happens, and a canal opens every 3 hours and the water continues to flow out. It doesn't stop for 3 hours, it continues to flow out. So since it's running for 3 hours, my yard becomes like a small lake, and you can't drive your car on it and you can't walk on it. There's just too much water. You wouldn't want to do that. But afterwards, when the water goes down, the grass is green and shiny and there are worms. So I decided that I wanted to have a garden, and I talked it over with my husband, and he said, fine, go ahead, have a garden. And I felt great. I felt like a little farmer. I picked out a little plot of soil and put wood around it, and I took a machine that churned up the soil and it turned it to make it healthy and good to plant in. So I went and I got more soil to put on top of that, and I brought it in a truck and I poured it over the other soil, and then I started to plant seeds. I got 4 different types of seeds. They were lettuce, red pepper, spinach, and squash. So I'm a beginner, and I didn't realize that with cabbage seeds, you just could place one in by hand and then individual cabbages would grow. I didn't even pay any attention to that rule, so I took the bag and I just sprinkled the cabbage seeds all down in a line. So I did the same to the spinach and the red pepper. I sprinkled them all down in a line. But the squash, I remembered something. I remembered that with squash seeds, you have to plant them far apart because squash gets so big and you don't want them to get tangled up, get their vines to get tangled together. So I did that. I planted the squash seeds far apart so they wouldn't get tangled together. So I watered them every day, and I also encouraged them because you have to encourage them. You have to say, please grow, and just encourage the plants to grow. I noticed that a bunch of birds would fly around the garden and I would shoo them away, and that's when I realized, oh, that's why farms and gardens have scarecrows. Birds love to peck at the seeds. So what I did is I let my dog out into the backyard and he barked and ran up to the birds and scared them away. I looked at my garden and no squash were growing and no red peppers were growing. A little bit of spinach was growing, but the cabbage was growing really well. So it was 1 week, or it was 2 weeks in Arizona, and like I said, it's easy to grow things in Arizona, but you have to be careful because things can disrupt your garden, like cats or dogs or bugs. People say the bugs are good for gardens, and they kind of keep the plants growing. But I didn't like the bugs there, and I didn't want to put chemicals on the garden. I wanted everything to be organic. But the bugs were eating my garden. My garden's like my baby, and I didn't want them to eat that. But a garden is hard work. You work a lot with your hands. You're down on your hands and knees and you're working in the garden. It's impossible for you to stay nice. So about 3 weeks later, Remember how I planted the cabbage seeds and I planted way too many? Well, those definitely grew a lot. There were tons of cabbages, enough that we had to eat cabbage for breakfast, lunch, and dinner all day, every day, cabbage all the time. And we started giving them to friends. We just had to get rid of all of this fresh cabbage. There was so much of it. And the spinach was the same way. There were no red peppers, which made me really sad. And there was one squash, but the squash was gross and it had little bumps on it and it just wasn't how a squash should be. So I decided that next week, whenever I go home, I was going to cover the garden in plastic, and whenever I was done doing that, I would put a fence around the garden. So hopefully next year, I'll have a successful garden.